Hi, I'm Monica Olson.
And I'm Jennifer Walsh.
And you're listening to the Biophilic Solutions Podcast, where every other week we sit down with experts and thought leaders in order to explore the innate connection between humans and nature and why we need nature to thrive.
We truly believe that reconnecting with the natural world and understanding our place within nature is a key to tackling the global environmental problems we face today.
So let's get to today's episode.
Hey, Monica.
Hey, Jennifer.
Monica, today we are diving deep into social prescribing, which is a topic that I'm so passionate about, especially the more I learn about it.
Yeah, you may have heard us talk about this concept a time or two when we refer to things like prescribing nature, which is basically when a doctor writes a prescription for their patient to get outside. So in today's episode, we're going to drill down into what that means and the movement to use nature, community, and the arts as preventative medicine.
Today, we're speaking with Julia Hotz, author of The Connection Cure, The Prescriptive Power of Movement, Nature, Art, Service, and Belonging. Julia is a solutions-focused journalist, which we love, whose stories have appeared in the New York Times, Wired, Scientific American, and the Boston Globe. Time, and even more. The Connection Cure is her first book, and it's the first book that tackles social prescribing specifically.
Yeah, so if you talk about social prescribing, Julia literally wrote the book on it.
Yeah, and in this conversation, we chat with Julia about why we need social prescribing in the first place, the profound relationship between environment and wellness, and the healthcare providers at the forefront of this growing movement.
All right, so let's get to our conversation with Julia Hotz.
Julia, we're so excited to have you on the show today.
So happy to be here. Such fans of you two and everything biophilic in this world.
Well, and Julia, Jen has been following you for a while and is obsessed with your book, The Connection Cure. Oh, she's got it here. I love it.
I love it.
And so we are super excited to dive in and talk about the book, talk about social prescribing, but love to hear your background. We always love our listeners to sort of know where you're coming from as a journalist and how you got into writing and why this topic.
Totally. Yeah. It's so great to be here. And speaking of biophilic, I see we have a fly on my mic. So there's nothing like nature in the episode. Anyway, yeah. So I am a journalist. I'm what we call a solutions-focused journalist. I work for an organization called the Solutions Journalism Network, where we try to help journalists report on what's working to solve the world's greatest problems. And I started doing that kind of reporting myself about 5 years ago, really, really interested in mental health, physical health as well, but really mental health, rising rates of anxiety and depression, and also what was coming on, the scene as an epidemic of loneliness, right? What actually works to address loneliness? And I started sort of seeing the same story over and over again. Lo and behold, when people are struggling individually with some symptom, whether they feel lonely, whether they feel anxious, whether they feel depressed, whether they feel in chronic pain, I learned about all over the globe how people were feeling better when they were reconnected to their community through some kind of activity, whether it was taking art classes, whether it was joining a cycling group, whether it was immersing themselves in some nature-based experience. I was so fascinated by this, and I learned that there was actually a term to describe this process of being referred or prescribed to an activity or resource in your community, and that's called social prescribing. And so I basically wrote one mega article about this, and someone emailed me and said, you should really write a book about this. Like, I think this is going to be a big thing. And sure enough, that was 2021. Here we are in 2024. 32 countries around the world now have systems of social prescribing in place, including the US, believe it or not, which we can get into. And so that's kind of like the professional journey. But personally, I became so interested in this really during the pandemic, when I was feeling all sorts of unwell, I think is the best word to use. I was tired all the time. I was feeling so bored. I was feeling anxious, and, never meant to write a book that would also sort of detail my journey because I thought that's kind of a boring story. Like, right, girl feels unwell during pandemic. It turns out that's how a lot of us were feeling. It's why words like languishing have become part of our vocabulary now. And so, yeah, spoiler alert, I end up doing some social prescribing on myself and finding that these specific medicines I highlight in the book, movement, nature, art, service, belonging, have all sorts of medicinal properties for the kinds of unwellness we can all feel from time to time.
Julia, I love that. And thank you for sharing that, because when I found out about your book, I just devoured it so quickly because I get it. Like, everything you're saying is so spot on. And I think it's just such a global feeling that people are having, especially since the pandemic. And you're right, because once I don't feel well in my own body, I have to step back and say, what is it? I'm missing my friends. I'm missing my community, or maybe I'm not out in nature enough, but that's, I'm basically outdoors every day. But if there's a day that I'm not outside and I'm alone, I'm, attached to my computer, it makes me feel really, really bad. So this book really resonated so deeply with so much of how I feel and how I try and think about things. But it's a really great in-depth book. So thank you for writing it.
Well, thank you. And I think and hope, you have been sounding the alarm about the need for this for years, the importance of nature, the importance of how we can prevent actually a lot of what becomes lifestyle and mental illness through these solutions. So thank you. I feel like social prescribing is sort of validation and affirmation of the research and practice that you and Monica have been doing, for also personally validating. Like, nobody I talk to, no matter what kind of politics you have or where you live, doesn't get it. Everybody identifies with one of those five. So I appreciate you saying that. And yeah, I hope a lot of people find it as intuitive as you did.
Yeah. Dig in for us a little bit about the term social prescribing. I think it's interesting. I always appreciate an aha moment where you're like, oh, this is this thing we're doing over here, but now somebody's put a label on it, because I think sometimes that helps us understand things when we can contain it in sort of a bucketed idea. So social prescribing, has it been around for a long time? And maybe we're just using that term now, but tell us a little bit about, how did we get here? I mean, beyond the pandemic, but what happened to get us here? We're having to say, go outside.
Right.
Jen and I are like, what in the world? It should just be such a, no pun, a natural thing. How did we get here?
Right. Yeah. That's the first reaction I'll often hear is like, really? We need a doctor to write us a prescription to, join a local walking group? And I think the answer is yes. And let's backtrack a little bit. How did we get here? So to your first question, this is not a new reinventing the wheel concept. In the introduction, I talk about how Hippocrates and Buddha and Razis of Persia, philosophers from thousands of years ago, had intimately understood the way that our environment affects our health, for better or for worse. This word social, believe it or not, it doesn't just refer to friendships, our social relationships. It refers to our environment and the way that 80% of our health is determined by factors in our environment. And so if that's true, if many of our leading sort of most burdensome illnesses, lifestyle illness, mental illness, are being determined in part by the way that our environments don't encourage us to move our bodies, spend time in nature, connect with others, have a sense of purpose, have people we can rely on, then yeah, we're going to not feel well. And 100 years ago, the leading causes of death were infectious diseases, things that had a clear sort of biochemical root cause. You could treat it with biochemical medicine. Today, our leading causes of death and our leading illnesses in the United States, but increasingly abroad, are from lifestyle and mental illness. And we know those are biopsychosocially determined, which means our medicine should be too. And so That is what social prescribing is. A social prescription is a healthcare referral to a non-medical activity in your environment, whether it's a cycling course, an art class. And I really love the tagline of this movement. It's about shifting from what's the matter with you, like tell me about your symptoms, to what matters to you. Tell me about what brings you
love that.
sense of joy and purpose, and let's literally prescribe you something that will help you get there.
That's really, I love that you just said that, because that just, all of a sudden I can feel that in my heart. Like, yeah, oh my God, that makes so much sense. Because you think about what are doctors prescribing, but what would, or when would a healthcare provider subscribe this? Social nature, connection. When would you see that happen?
Yeah. So this started in the UK, and, this has had a lot of, I would say, cousins over the years: lifestyle medicine, integrative medicine, holistic healing, alternative medicine, lots and lots of individual doctors and healthcare providers who have the resources and knowledge and time, importantly, to do this kind of care have been doing it. But in the UK, where this really took off as a movement, it happened not just through the will of individual doctors. It actually also happened due to all these systemic pressures. A statistic that says 1 in 5 doctor's appointments in the UK are made for purely social reasons. And so the way this would happen is, let's say there's a doctor has a patient. Oftentimes they would tell me that the patient has these really sort of unspecific symptoms. They have, sort of back pain, but with no underlying injury as being the reason. They feel lonely. They feel anxious, but, not to the point where it's requiring medication. What does a doctor do in that situation? Especially if that doctor in a place like the UK and increasingly here only has 15 minutes with them.
Sure.
Right. So what they would do is they would call on a member of their team, what's called a link worker in the UK, who is somebody who actually has the time to get to know, okay, what's really going on in this person's life. And lo and behold, often the people who report these sort of unspecific, socially determined symptoms have had a major upsetting event in their life. Their partner has left them. They've lost their job. Their parent has passed away. They've moved to a new place where they don't know anybody or speak the language. When those are the sort of root causes, that's where a doctor can shift that, or the link worker rather, can shift that conversation and say, okay, I'm getting the sense, I understand what's wrong. Tell me about what your life was like before this happened. Tell me about what you would do to cope with stress. Tell me about something you loved in childhood, but you haven't had a chance to do since. Getting at these sort of what matters to you questions, and then based on the link worker's knowledge of what's in the community, literally prescribing them a spot in that and following up to see how it's going.
So I think that's really interesting of one, that they did that and they took the time to kind of make that add-on in the UK. But two, as I'm sitting here thinking like, well, why can't I just prescribe to you? Why can't I just say, Julia, you are tired, you're da-da-da, I really think you need to take this. You love pottery. If you took this pottery class, it's going to give you this great community. And you might say, that's great. Thanks so much. I appreciate it, Monica. But when you're hearing it from a physician, right, it's a different thing. And I wonder, when you're getting a prescription, it's this, you're sort of following, like, as somebody who's a little bit of a rule follower, you're following the rules to this authority figure. And, hopefully this is a positive one. But I think it's interesting because why a prescription from a physician? And is there higher follow through versus a spouse or partner makes a suggestion, or I make a suggestion as a friend to you guys? Does it just not have the weight, and then the accountability maybe?
Boom. There you go. Okay. I mean, I think two things are true. Like, I think in part 3 of the book gets into this, you absolutely can prescribe yourself this. And my book gets into the evidence base of why, for example, prescribing yourself some sort of movement when you're feeling sad, some symptoms of depression is really medicinal. We can get into this. When you're feeling really distracted and burnt out, prescribing yourself some form of nature can be medicinal. Very specific and rigorous science demonstrating this. But Monica, I think you're totally right that what makes it a little bit different when a doctor prescribes it is you trusting that not only is that doctor relying on that evidence base, but they're going to hold you accountable to follow through with it the same way they'd hold you accountable to take your medication. I think what's also different, sometimes I hear the question is, well, doctors have been telling us to like exercise for years. But I think when it's not just saying sort of abstractly, go exercise for 30 minutes a day versus I'm going to prescribe you a spot in this cycling group. They meet at 10 a.m. on Tuesdays for 90 minutes. That's a totally different ball game, as is all the people in that cycling group also holding you accountable to show up week after week.
Yeah.
That's so spot on.
Well, and also I think back to the loneliness epidemic, we are missing that and obviously the pandemic, brought all of these things to the forefront of the huge importance of community and the huge importance of nature. And there was a ton of confusion, right, around you had different cities shutting down parks or shutting down beaches, you can't be in groups, right? So there was all of these different things. But what kind of came out of it, I think, was that outside was safe and distance was safe, but there were still things you could do safely where you could be comfortable. One of the articles, I think the headline was, "You're not sick, your environment is." And I don't know if that was the kickoff article, but I think that's just that headline there is a great aha moment. And so, I think one of the things was like, we're a victim of the system, right? And again, we've built this place called cities or society that created a sick environment. So talk a little bit about that and where you see some of the challenges, but maybe where things are changing.
Yeah.
In the research you did.
I'm glad you brought that up. That headline is a little spicy.
I like it.
It's good. No, it's very catching. Really
catching. I appreciate that. And I feel like you two have sort of already drank the Kool-Aid in terms of like, our environments affects our health. But I can understand how someone reading that for the first time is like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
This is a disorder that I have. My body is broken. I don't feel well. And to that, I want to say, like, yes, your symptoms are 100% real. It's not in your head. What you're feeling is very legitimate. But a lot of those feelings are a response to an environment you weren't fit to live in. And in fact, this article talks about how our very earliest conceptions of mental disorders in the United States through the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, they actually used this language of reaction types. So in other words, you didn't necessarily have ADHD, attention deficit, hyperactive disorder. You were having a hyperactive reaction to an environment.
That's
and
so interesting.
I know for both of your work, like you talk a lot about the importance of schools, right? That encourage kids to thrive in their environments with their natural sort of impulses to move and be creative and wonder. I think that framework really gets into that. But I think as adults too, like I have an analogy in the article that compares the sort of unwellness we're all experiencing as being hot in a room. And if everybody is hot, is the solution really for all of us to take like these pills that help us stop sweating? No, maybe we should see if we could turn the air conditioner up, cool the room down. Maybe it's our environment when it's so many of us who are sick, and so many of us also who are sick with multiple different disorders, right? You're rarely just depressed. Often you're depressed and you're lonely. Often you have chronic pain and you're anxious. And I think that it's what I love about social prescribing is it helps us think about the problem by talking about a solution. If there are people who can heal from their symptoms of chronic pain and depression through changing their environment, then maybe they didn't have a broken brain or a disordered, system all along. Maybe they just were not in an environment that they needed to thrive.
That's so key. And I think with your book, and there's so much more conversations around these solutions, but we never were taught, like you said, like we never knew this. We didn't think about our environment and making an impact. Like I'm just, sitting in my New York City apartment and the construction and the noise is so jarring.
Yeah.
So how do you count? But I wasn't aware, until I started into this work, like your book too. It's the awareness puts a new lens of like, okay, what do I need to support my body to make sure it's the most well it can be
100%.
everywhere you go.
Yeah.
And the you don't know until you have something different, right? Like
Yes.
the power went out the other day here, and we were at one of the restaurants. We were just having a drink, so we weren't waiting for food or anything, but the power went out, and it was just like, obviously it wasn't great for the people in the restaurant who were trying to get their food, but we were like, it's so quiet.
Yeah.
And it was sort of like a resetting of what can you do? Nobody's going to be able to go home and watch a show, can't scroll the internet. Okay, well, it's sort of those resetting what can be normal or resetting what can be lovely. Like, Jen, I know you go upstate New York all the time, and a lot of people always say that, oh, I got to get out of the city because I need to get away from the noise of the hustle and the bustle and everything. And so rethinking what's normal and how can we have a more pleasant environment. And I think, the basic resources, which I think was interesting, is you sort of are hearing about this right now. Like, we deserve clean air, abundant trees, nutritious food, good housing. And it's even saying cash, right? Like, that's an interesting one that maybe we can get into a little bit, like if you have money, and even just a little bit of extra, it changes how you feel about yourself from a confidence. So where do we go from rethinking these resources that they're maybe a human right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love that you picked up on cash, and it comes from a practice in Canada. Dr. Gary Block has created this tool where he will literally prescribe his patients cash. And he doesn't do this by taking a $20 bill out of his wallet, but he has a team that helps people figure out how they can reclaim more cash back on their tax forms. The data on that program and other programs like it that are trying to basically give people more material resources shows that people feel more confident, they feel less anxious, they feel less stressed. One really neat study, this didn't make it in the book, but I did a story a few years ago about this program in Germany that crowdsources basic incomes. Just gives them out in a lottery and follows the journey of what people do with that money and how their moods are for that year. Lo and behold, what people did, y'all will love this. People, and there's always this fear about basic income. Oh, people are going to spend it on went back to school. They spent time with creative pursuits. And sure enough, by the end of that year, their levels of stress and anxiety dramatically decreased. And it sort of makes you wonder and imagine, what would our lives be like if that was just sort of guaranteed? If we could orient our time around what mattered to us rather than what made us money. Because I love what you said, Monica. You don't realize what's possible until you're in that different environment. And that's just the baseline. But imagine if we extended that, as we're doing with social prescribing, and saying, okay, let's give everybody the basic resources they need to thrive, and let's give them opportunities to reconnect with people and activities that really matter to them. We will see, as we're continuing to see with social prescribing, rates of mental and lifestyle illness dramatically decrease.
We've got to do something.
We have to. Well, can you kind of tap into, one of your chapters was around social prescribing in big countries I know you have Canada and Australia, but can you kind of tap into like what you saw or learned in those specific countries?
Sure. So I think, as we've said, social prescribing started in the UK, where it's thriving. They've mostly funded these link workers. There's a lot of widespread adoption of this, I would say, in the UK more than anywhere else. And people hear that and they think, okay, that's great. But the UK is like a tiny little island. How is this ever going to work in an enormous place like the US?
Mm-hmm.
And we get to the US chapter, but I wanted to start first with Canada and Australia, equally big countries. And rather than it being this sort of top-down policy, what's happening there is local models of social prescribing are spreading.
Fascinating.
Often motivated by both like what is it in that community that people tend to be afflicted with and what resources are available. And so in Canada, I'll just talk about them for a second. They have this really innovative model of community health centers, which actually started in the US, but has really taken off in Canada.
Wow.
And linking people systemically to both the basic resources, cash, job help, food, but also to community activities and resources. And it's so successful, in fact, at bringing down rates of loneliness, saving money, reducing reliance on doctors, people who've passed through the social prescriptions, coming back to volunteer to help other people.
Wow.
So you have
That's
this
amazing.
beautiful all hands on deck approach, which I think just really shows you what's possible in big countries. No, it's not going to be this authorizing top-down policy that rarely works in big countries, but it is going to be local communities learning from each other, sharing their best practices, scaling up these models so that it becomes, culturally viable to implement these kinds of systems.
Mm-hmm. What are some you have a lot of examples. So give us some like real world successful outcome stories some of your favorites.
Yeah, sure. Well, since we're here on this podcast, let's obviously talk about the nature prescriptions.
Love it.
Fantastic.
So I'll tell you about Heather. Heather is 25 years old. So one of the first things I notice about her is that she has this amazing capacity for attention to detail. We're walking together on this path and she's noticing these tiny buds on the blade of grass below. And I'm thinking, wow, she is really paying attention. But you come to find out that Heather actually is struggling with her attention in other parts of her life, meaning that she is very chronically stressed. And this was showing up in her life as symptoms like chest pains. She would lie awake at night and just go through her to-do list because she works 3 jobs. She's the caretaker for her grandmother. She's the breadwinner for her family. And so when she came to her doctor with these symptoms, the doctor said, yeah, okay, you're stressed. And she said, okay, well, I could have told you that, but what do I do about it? And from there, we segue into all this research showing that nature is an extraordinarily powerful antidote for stress because of the way that it can capture our attention without taxing it. And, we go into all this history of things like forest bathing and smaller studies that show spending time in nature makes us more calm. We produce fewer stress hormones. Our blood pressure decreases. Our immune system function increases by producing more natural killer cells. And lo and behold, nature is amazing. And I love this one. We have less activity in our subgenual prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain associated with rumination. And so bringing this back to Heather, who fortunately is one of the very few people in the United States who lives in a place. She lives in Rutland, Vermont, where there's actually a pilot of a nature prescription program.
Fantastic.
Yeah, she's able to be prescribed in a pilot called Nature RX.
Mm-hmm.
And what that is it's a pretty much 10-week group course in various quote unquote joyful outdoor nature activities run by this amazing local group, Come Alive Outside. Heather realizes that some of the things that are taxing her attention, some of the things that are keeping her up at night, all of her to-do lists, she's able to shift her perspective on them when she's outside, because that's something she loves. It's always been a source of joy for her. No, it doesn't make the underlying stressors go away, but it allows her to have a break from them and sort of emerge more calm and restored when she has to retackle them. And she says literally it helped her symptoms of her chest pains and her insomnia go down. So there's some physical value to that as well.
Well, and I love the, all these terms, right? Prescribing nature and I think Richard Louve's book, Vitamin N, was the first time that I thought, well, this is crazy that we have to prescribe nature. But I think at the same time, that sort of, we think of taking our vitamins. So if we can compare nature to this thing that is helpful to you. And there's another example that you had, and this is what I'm coming to, is culture vitamins was a prescription that somebody had. So talk about culture vitamins versus nature vitamins, if you will.
Totally. Yeah. I love that. Well, I love the vitamin framework because it's not just that this is a medicine for people who are sick. This is also an enhancer for people who are on the whole pretty well. So that was the logic behind calling this program Culture Vitamins, this program in Denmark, in which, again, sort of same structure, 8 to 10 weeks, group-based, taken around to different cultural activities like concerts and museum visits, and my favorite, shared reading sessions at the library, kind of like book club.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
And that follows a whole body of research showing that art is really effective for anxiety. The story there is that there was a man named Jonas who is this wonderful, imaginative history buff who also happens to struggle with severe social anxiety, panic disorder, agoraphobia, is getting all these panic attacks. And it was through that he was prescribed a spot in this culture vitamin course, ends up loving it because it was something that mattered to him. And he says by the end of it, through this course, I was able to become myself again. When I was in therapy, when I was taking medication, even though that helped me on some level, it also made the anxiety feel like a self-fulfilling prophecy. But when he was in this environment where he was listening to music and inspecting art and reading some of his favorite books again, he was taken out of his own head for a little bit. And I think that's what all of these are about. Nature, culture, movement. It's a break from that environment where we're by ourselves in our head, telling ourselves these stories that don't serve us. It's amazing. I keep going back to your brilliant point, Monica. Like, it's about putting us in a different environment where we can realize what's possible.
Well, it changes our perspective, right?
Exactly.
It's sort of why travel can be so wonderful. And travel does not need to be Europe. Travel can be go to your, neighboring town and wander that little main street, find something to sort of, to your point, take you out of yourself, create perspective. I think so much, mental illness and depression in your head, and you really don't believe that there's anywhere that you can go and there are any solutions. It's very, very debilitating and really, really sad, for people, because we can sit here, without depression and say, oh, it's going to be fine. You're going to be okay. Look at all the things. But you really can't get out of your head.
Right.
Trying to change people's perspective, whether that's, getting outside in nature, because there's such a all the reasons we know. But I love the culture vitamin.
Yeah.
Right? Because you really are looking at new things, whatever that is. Even the, I don't know if you guys have been hearing about all these book clubs that are silent book clubs.
Yes.
Where you just go and read.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but I love that. It's such a cool, just an example of like, oh my God, we are desperate for community, even if it's community in silence.
Well, that's it, right, Monica? And like what you're saying, Monica and Julia, like it's about being human. Our
Yes.
humanity of like why we're creative beings that are being forced to think that we have to be attached to our technology 24/7. We love
Yeah.
technology. We never ever bash it, but at the
We're
same
on it right
time,
now.
I know. Thank God for it. We get to see you, Julia. But at the same time, we have to understand like we are human beings needing these prescriptions to remind us of like what makes us human are the arts. It is music. It is movement. It is a tribe of people. It is a community. Like those are the key essential ingredients to what makes us well and also help us get out of our own head
Amen.
because again change our perspective on like wow that's beautiful, look at that piece of art I've never seen before, or like okay I'm gonna show you guys a little thing. So this week I went to an incredible hotel in the Catskills, Monica's River, and I got to paint. I haven't painted
See?
for, I mean, I was so happy in this room. I've never been to a hotel that actually has an arts and crafts room open 24/7. You could play with anything. And I'm just back there just hours. And
Love.
I was
love
so
it. That's
fulfilled because I've been
fantastic.
wanting to do that for so long, is to use my
That's
hands
cool.
and be creative and moving my body and doing something that made me feel, I mean, of course I'm not gonna like post and prick that anywhere, but it felt so good doing it. So like you're just so spot on, both of you
Love
saying
it.
this.
I love that so much. And to tie this like full circle into your work, I think that creating art, receiving art is in some ways an extension of being in nature, right? Like the book talks about how we have been doing this stuff for thousands and thousands
Oh,
of years, civilizations independently doing it. What is we
I know.
evolved to try to be able to make sense of our environment, to share stories, to feel. And so I just love that, I think you're most known, of course, for being in nature and movement, but actually creating art and painting, I think, is an extension of that because, like you said, it's an extension of what it means to be human.
Mm-hmm. And I don't
Yeah.
know why we suddenly think all these things are extras.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. And I don't know if it's because the schools, start taking money away from these resources like art and music. But why is it extra? Why aren't these things the center core of it? Culturally, society, the industry, it just, the past 150 years, it's taken us away from sort of the day-to-day joys. And I
Yeah.
know it's like maybe cliche, simple pleasures, but like, why can't we make these the core and then build our life out around that versus we're building our lives around it's a whole nother podcast, but
Right.
not fill us, but we think they're going to fill us, but they don't.
Well, I think that's the call to action for all of us and for you. And it's what you're doing with this podcast and this platform. You're making it very known that these are not extras, that this is an innate part of being human. And, my book kind of makes this case that one big obstacle social prescribing has in becoming mainstream is because there is no profit for, when we're prescribed trees
Exactly.
or where prescribed art. But I think that change starts with us. I think that the
Amen.
healthcare system is at a breaking point. They're realizing that this diagnose, treat, repeat isn't going to work anymore. Now, we do have this alternative, and there actually is an economic case increasingly to invest in prevention. And I think in the meantime, it's going to take all of us to say, these are not extras. This is part of what makes me well. It's not being anti-medicine to also have these options on the healthcare menu.
Right. Definitely. Well, tell us what are the plans in the U.S. that you've seen? Are there grassroots like the one in Vermont? I know everybody gets really grumpy when you start talking about socialized medicine, which these other countries we talked about have. So what's the possibilities? Is there federal funding? Is it local? Where are we, and where should we be pushing on our elected officials or community leaders for?
Great question. And you're so right.
You're like,
well,
we don't know.
I'm really hopeful because I do think, for example, we have, like you called out the example in Vermont, we have this amazing doctor, Dr. David Sapgier in Ohio, who's built a national and worldwide movement called Walk with a Doc, in which doctors are literally walking with their patients.
It's a great program.
Right. So
great. I love it.
we have examples in California. We have Ardashir Hashmi at the Cleveland Clinic. So some of it is coming from just doctors and healthcare professionals who are like, I am going to do this. I don't care about is this going to make me or my hospital a lot of money? This is what's right, And a lot of them are doing it because they feel so burnt out by this system, They don't feel good just prescribing a pill when really what they know the patient needs is a sense of community and a sense of purpose again. So there's that. But then, and this is where all the economists are going to be like, ooh, yay. Okay, there is something here. There's also a case to be made, as you both know very well, for prevention. Right. And we've seen, for example, like my parents have an insurance plan right now where their gym memberships are partially covered by their insurance. And the logic behind that is, well, if the insurance company invests in some sort of physical activity, we see the same sometimes with fresh produce. This is actually an investment in their long-term health, and it's going to save the insurer money down the line, right? They're not going to have to be dealing with, covering 4 medications if people, can lower their blood pressure on their own, right? So, and this is really cool, especially given what you just said, Jennifer, about loving your painting experience. Now, in places like New Jersey and as of last month, Massachusetts, insurers are starting to cover arts prescriptions. This started, this started in nearby Newark, New Jersey, where Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield, an insurer, has teamed up with NJPAC, New Jersey Performing Arts Center, a local arts provider, to run this pilot where they're covering 6 months of arts prescriptions, whether it's glass-making classes, concerts, for people at risk of overspending on their insurance. Spoiler alert, incredible. It's super successful. So now, also based on an earlier pilot Massachusetts did, Massachusetts was the first state to really experiment with this. They've expanded into a statewide pilot with 300 different community partners, Mass General Hospital, Art Pharmacy. It's amazing. It's this thing of, I think if you build it, they will come. Like states and cities are designing these really innovative models, showing it's possible. We're trading the templates, and we're going to make this a movement from the ground up.
I'm in awe. Yeah, I'm going to go look into the Newark because it is so close to me. So now I'm going to have to go check that out and do a little research of myself. Fantastic.
Well, and you have an amazing website, right? Socialprescribing.co. Now, is this your website that you've put together and stood up?
I like to call it's our website,
Okay.
I might have written this book, The Connection Cure, which is the first book about social prescribing, but it rests on research and resources and, practical tools that have come way before me. So I wanted this to be a space where we could together crowdsource the latest research, the latest resources. So definitely check that out, www.socialprescribing.co, to learn more about the Newark pilot or any of the research studies we talked about today. It's all there.
So cool. Well, and we'll drop a link in our show notes too.
Yeah.
Great.
So where else can we support you? Is there anywhere, are you online, social? Where can we find you and support you? And
what do you like to engage online?
Well, I like to engage in my beautiful, joyful outdoors, of course. But when I am online, it's usually talking about the benefits of all that stuff. And that's on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. All of that is the handle Hotz Thoughts, HOTZ Thoughts.
I have enjoyed watching you, Julia. I have, thankfully, we're connected now on all the social platforms, and I just love what you share because I get excited to see you speaking about the book and the people that turn out to listen and hear the importance of it all. And you're educating. And again, like what we talk about, you're giving hope, you're giving solutions. And it's all like what we love so much at this podcast is like showcasing people that are really bringing awareness to what's important and the preventive measures we need to be healthier people.
Well, likewise to you. I'm so grateful for you. Like I said, I mean, social prescribing is an affirmation of the work that you and so many others have done to get us talking about the power of nature as a tool for prevention, the power of movement. So thank you. Hey, let's keep the combos going.
Yeah, definitely.
Sounds
We're thrilled
great
that you were here with us and took the time, and we're so excited about the book, and everybody needs to go out and get a copy and demand social prescription.
That's it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Julia. Jen, I found that conversation so fascinating. And like Julia mentioned, it was really validating.
Oh my gosh. As you could tell, I could not agree more. I think we all know on some level that we need to reconnect to nature. We need the arts and we need community, but it's really encouraging to see more and more people in the healthcare industry sound this alarm.
Yeah, exactly. And really to give nature and culture the validation of an actual medical intervention. And to reiterate, this is not anti-medicine by any means, but we know that so many modern ailments are lifestyle based. And so spending time in nature is a proven treatment. So why wouldn't we prescribe it to patients?
Exactly. And I also thought it was insightful when Julia talked about the difference between a doctor vaguely telling you to exercise more versus the power of prescribing a workout class. It's a huge difference.
Yeah, very much so. I think intuitively on some level, when you're craving time outside or more time in museums, that's one thing to get yourself off the couch and go do it. But if a doctor is telling you to do those things, it just adds another level of accountability.
It really does. The basic income conversation was also really interesting to me. Again, intuitively, it makes total sense that more financial security leads to less anxiety and better overall health. But it's cool to see things like this basic income gain traction from this lens of public health.
Yeah. And as a culture, I think we still have a long way to go, especially in the US. But I do feel like we're seeing more and more conversations about rest, nature, preventative healthcare, and arts. Like we really need these as human rights. And I think there's a real desire to slow down and just reconnect to the things that make us human. It's a slow progress, but we're making progress nonetheless.
My thoughts exactly. Okay, so it goes without saying, we highly encourage all of our listeners to purchase a copy of The Connection Cure and definitely check out Julia's incredible website, socialprescribing.co, to see more research. Both are linked in our show notes.
Yes, check those out, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks.
Okay, bye, Monica.
Bye, Jennifer.
Thanks so much for listening. If you've enjoyed the podcast, we would love for you to follow us on our favorite listening app. Give us a 5-star rating and please leave us a review.
Listens, follows, and reviews really go such a long way and help us share these amazing interviews and solutions for a wider network.
Absolutely. And we'll be back with another great guest in a few weeks.